Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin can and string, we have our analyst and co-host. He is a contributor to the Daily Norseman, along with Cold Omaha and 1500 ESPN. He is Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing this Monday night?
I'm doing pretty well. That was a really fun game to watch, the Seattle-Buffalo game. That's the only fun game to watch this week, by the way.
That is the only fun that you will have watching a game this week, actually. I didn't understand how you could call delay of game while the refs were placing a ball, but apparently that was a thing.
I feel like that might be the second time that's happened this year. I feel like I remember another instance in, this season where the refs were standing over the ball, way too long, and then they ended up calling a delay of game. Oh, that happened to the Vikings, I think.
Wait, there was something screwy going on, and it may or may not have helped cost the team the game. I bet that happened to the Vikings game. Yeah, I feel like with the Choose Your Own Adventure book that is this season, why not go down that path?
Yeah, exactly. So, I wrote a recent piece that, the Vikings have given the fans literally everything this season, now that they've handed them that heart-wrenching loss. So why not also, some of those interesting delay of game penalties?
Exactly. So, with that, welcome to this week's show. We're going to recap the Lions' loss, but we're going to do it in a way that we have done in previous years when the game was too just abysmal to talk about, just straight up. So instead, we are going to outsource this to you, the fans. We have a great mailbag-centric episode to go through, so we have plenty of stuff to cover, and we do have a good donation to start off with. Our door knocker from a couple episodes ago gave us a real nice donation, named by the name of Joseph, and said, "Hello, I wanted to express my appreciation for what is truly the #1 Minnesota Vikings podcast. The smart and entertaining content featured guests who I wouldn't have discovered otherwise, as well as Arif's critical thinking and analytical approach to covering the team consistently provided in this podcast transcends most of the Vikings-related content that's out there. You're like the lone craft brew IPA amid an array of domestic taps." Damn. I'll take that.
I really appreciate that, especially because, James is being such an asshole about requiring people donate if they see me. But
not necessarily if they see you. I just feel like if they knock on your door, then...
It wasn't like he came to my door knowing it was me, so it's not like,
You're not that level of celebrity yet? Is that what you're saying?
Not as far as I can tell. I don't know. People might be driving by my house. I'm like, oh my god, that's where Arif lives. But as far as I can tell, no, that's not happening. Also, it's very difficult to drive by because I live at the end of. It's
a really weird spot. Yeah, a really weird area.
They really should just allow the road to extend to Hennepin, but whatever.
They're probably just trying to keep you away from Hennepin for a reason. They're trying to protect you. From the fans. Anyway, nevertheless, the work you've produced on a weekly basis has cured me time and again from the household chore doldrums, as well as accompany me on lonesome morning jogs. In a nutshell, just wanted to say thanks and keep up the good work. And thank you for the very nice donation to the show. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, and you can donate there. It's more of a monthly thing like an NPR pledge, so you can go ahead and donate there, or the PayPal link. So, or if you happen to be knocking on his door, just slip him tree fitty there. Arif will appreciate it. So we have a couple emails to open the show. First things first, we got an email that I didn't put in the show notes because I wanted to have it be a surprise for you, Arif.
No.
Ahem. In episode 157, the Jay Cutler roller coaster, on the Daily Norseman page, someone has this podcast labeled as episode 166 instead of the real number, which is 157. I mean,
I have no idea what happened.
What are we to believe? That this is a magic episode or something? Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
Yeah, those responsible for the error have been sacked. No, I noticed that when I was putting up the last episode, which I believe was episode 158, and I like clicked on the previous episode because I always like copy and paste the screen at the bottom unless we've got like something we need to change about like the YouTube video or whatever. And I noticed that the episode link that I was pasting into the article, which is episode 158, was decidedly lower than the episode number from which I was editing, which was 166. And I was like, man, James really screwed this up. It's clearly not episode 158.
Like, yes, it has to be James's fault. Oh.
Yeah. So then I went through the archives, which is just like, it was a tab over, so I didn't like do anything. I just went to the next tab, and it's like, 154, 155, 156, 157, 158, and I was like, the fault might not be with James this time.
As it turns out, not his fault this time. I just thought it was great that somebody decided to run the whole Simpsons quote at us. Like, that was fantastic. I appreciated that more than anyone else on the planet, probably. So we actually do have a good starting question from Bradley Peterson, who asks, who is at fault for the loss? Zimmerman? Walsh? Spielman? Me?
So it is neither Zimmerman nor Spielman, because neither of those people are employed by the Vikings. But, I think that between, Zimmer, Spielman, Walsh, maybe Xavier Rhodes, whatever, I think that you could very easily make the argument that any of them are at fault for the loss. Like, that's the problem with, like, losing close games in overtime, is that because one play can swing things so much when you already know that the result is tied, who's at fault for the loss is literally everybody. But, the question then is not sort of, if this person's performance was changed with the result changed, because that's true for basically everybody. The question then becomes, who is it most reasonable to expect a better performance from that would have changed the game, right? Because now we're asking, like, it's an extra point. You got to make an extra point. Or hey, you just got to let the clock run down for, like, 15 more seconds. You got to let the clock run down for 15 minutes. That's it. That's all you need to do, right? Both of those are, like, very reasonable expectations. Is it reasonable to expect that, Rick Spielman draft not like the worst offensive lineman in the league? Like, yeah, no, that's pretty reasonable, I think. Maybe that one's a little bit harder because evaluation is just like a much more difficult skill, and it's very long term, and it's, you couldn't predict the injuries and, all that. So maybe I'm going to shelve the Spielman question for a second. But, hey, if Bradford, makes one more throw, I think that, and some of those throws were very reasonable to make. I think that probably the Vikings win the game, right? So who's at fault for the loss? It's like everybody, but who performed the worst when it was reasonable to expect that they performed better? I think that you could say Blair Walsh. I think the question about Blair Walsh is actually a lot more complicated than he missed an extra point and he had a kick blocked. Because the more I watch it, especially if I watch it in slow motion, the more likely I am to assign responsibility for him for how low the trajectory is, or to think that the kick was going to be shanked. And I think a lot of people say that kick was going to be shanked, and I don't think that that's a reasonable assumption to make, given what little information we have, because very, very often kicks will have a very harsh angle initially and then just kind of even out. Like, the football is shaped funny. That's why kickers are paid $1 million. It's because you have the ability to, like, hook the ball. Like, I think I looked at a couple of kicks from the left hash from that same angle, just really quickly in the past, couple hours. So I looked at, for example, somebody who's really bad at these kicks, Robert Aguayo. I looked at, a couple of other kickers who like to kick from that hash, and they look actually kind of the same. Or not all of them, but a lot of them will look the same, where the ball moves really harshly to the kicker's left or whatever. Because I think Walsh was kicking from like his right hash that time, which is a little unusual, I guess. But I guess he couldn't choose where he was kicking from in that instance. And and it moves really harshly to one side before it evens out, and all we saw was the harsh movement to one side. So I don't really think he would have shanked it, even though our initial angle of the ball shows a really harsh movement. I think that's just really unfair because a lot of kicks will hook really sharply, but we don't tend to look at sharp hooks and kicks until it's already, significantly in the air anyway. And so I don't want to say he was going to shank it. I don't think that trajectory was necessarily too low. I thought that was a really athletic play by the Detroit Lions. So I don't want to say it's Walsh's fault for that. And I think that the extra point thing is a really interesting, complicated question because I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings would have gone for a field goal in that situation at the very end of the game where they go for it on fourth down and fail. I know that the Vikings said that they want to be aggressive. Mike Zimmer said that he's wanted to be aggressive and that they try to win games. But very often I've seen the Vikings do this where, they'll go for, overtime instead of for the win because it kind of preserves, your ability of your team to do the stuff that you want to do for longer, which is not a decision I actually agree with, but it's something, that the team and NFL teams in general tend to do. So paradoxically, it might have even been the case had Blair Walsh made that kick, that the Vikings would have been in a worse spot because they would have played for overtime. On the other hand, like the clock situation would have been different. Who knows what would have happened. There's like some butterfly effect stuff in there too. I'm not saying, Blair Walsh was good for missing the extra point. Obviously that's bad, but to say it's his fault, I think kind of ignores a lot of chains of causality that sets off. Like, how would they have played it differently, if the game was, would they have gone for a 2-point conversion here? I think they did go for a 2-point conversion at one point. Maybe they wouldn't have. And so maybe that had no impact at all. So I think that blaming Blair for it is not necessarily a correct assignation of like who's at fault. But it's not as if the Vikings shouldn't seriously evaluate their options at kicker, which, it seems like they're doing. They brought in a couple of kickers. We know that they brought in at least 2, Randy Bullock, who they were big fans of in the draft. The year they drafted Blair Walsh, I believe they drafted Walsh in the 6th round. Randy Bullock was drafted in the 5th round. He suffered from some confidence issues when he was with the Houston Texans. Big guy, UCLA teammate with Jeff Locke and Kevin McDermott, which means you've got like a potential for like a UCLA triumvirate on special teams to go with the UCLA linebackers that they have in the nickel package. But, beyond, I think they're also bringing in, there's one kicker that they were rumored to bring in that it was initially rumored that they would not bring in. And I already forgot his name. Kai Forbath. Maybe it's Kai Forbath, not Randy Bullock. I think Kai Forbath went to UCLA. I messed that up. It's a Chris Thomason tweet because he's like very good at like figuring those things out. Besides that, I think that maybe a better way to assign blame is, hey, Blair Walsh kicked a touchback when he should have kicked it, 5 yards deep, and that would have drained off more from the clock. Like maybe that's even more accurate as a way to assign blame to Blair Walsh than that extra point or whatever. That said, I think that Zimmer's time management was a problem. I know some people are like making fun of it because like what could you expect? And I guess it's the only time that a team down 3 from that field position with 30 seconds left has ever gone on to win the game. But I don't think that that's necessarily sort of a fair representation of the odds in that situation because of the acceleration of the passing game and because of how specific the argument about that field position is. We know that Matt Prater, who is a record-holding field goal kicker, can make it from 58 yards, and so things kind of change for him versus sort of the average team. And we also know that those things change if the Lions are up 5 more yards, right? And I think that those numbers change pretty significantly. So I think the percentage odds weren't 1%, which I think one of the things that people were looking at was like, hey, maybe the timing wasn't that bad. I think that you need to maximize your odds of winning, and I think that Zimmer didn't do that. And then you can talk about the 3-man pass rush and prevent defense. I think that that's definitely a problem. I think one of the problems with the 3-man pass rush is, and I'm a lot less opposed to them than a lot of people are, but I think one of the problems on that specific one is that Linval Joseph was in. And, I mean, I love Linval a lot, but he wasn't rushing the passer there. He was like containing the. I don't really know what he was doing.
Yeah, he was in a real. Yeah, we sent 3, but one of them was dancing. Like right. Linval wasn't doing anything.
Right, yeah. And like in a situation where it's a compressed pocket on 1st and 10, Linval is great at rushing the passer. But like in this situation, He can't like knife the gap between the. That's not the kind of pass rusher he is.
Maybe he was just there to make sure that he was just there to contain it, to make sure that that Matt Stafford didn't try to run up the middle or something. And he's been
Stafford. It's not Colin Kaepernick, man.
I think the bigger thing that surprised me out of all this is the fact that Matt Stafford was able to pull out a win against a winning team, like a team with a winning record. That is
that's been a bit, hasn't it?
Incredibly rare, but and what's funny is
something like a 1-23 or 2-30 record, something like that against winning records.
He chalked up a couple last year, but this year he got one from us, and it's funny to read some of the takes from. I have a Detroit Lions friend who I bet beer on with the game, and I'm kind of salty that now I have to mail him beer. But it was funny after the game. He's like, "Yeah, Matt Stafford isn't bad," and I just replied in all caps, "Except against teams with a winning record. You've watched this team, right? You've watched him as a person. This isn't." It's too hot today. Question from the mailbag. Stephen Adams asks, since we've tried him everywhere else, can Patterson kick?
I mean, I actually heard a story that he can. Like, maybe it has something to do with his time in Tennessee, or this is actually going to be really difficult to look up because every time you search Cordell Patterson kick, you get a bunch of stuff about kick returners or, kickers, talking about him and stuff like that. But I think that there was like talk about him being able to kick in a practice at Tennessee, but like emergency kicker stuff, not like remember when the Lions had to have Ndamukong Suh kick and he like missed an extra point because he's a defensive tackle.
He is, to be fair, he is very famous in Detroit for his kicks. So like, I understand the logic behind putting him into a position where he's
he also won a field goal kicking competition.
Teachers try to put their students into positions that they can succeed in. We're trying to play to your strengths. I could see Caldwell being like, instead of putting you in a situation where you're getting suspended for kicking things, let's just let you kick the football and not the other. It'll be fine. What about Linval Joseph? He seems to be busy.
Yeah,
he's apparently our stud
nose
fullback.
Tackle, fullback, kicker, Linval Joseph. Yeah, no, I think Patterson is the emergency everything. I think because he's the emergency quarterback. I'm still surprised it's not Jerick McKinnon, although maybe it is now because he can do wildcat stuff.
I think you have to put him down as the emergency QB, but I mean, Jared Allen was a snapper for a while. I feel like Patterson can probably do that too.
Well, Jared Allen, I think, was formerly the long snapper at Idaho State. It's Idaho State.
In college, he was a long snapper. Yeah.
In fact, when he was drafted, and he was drafted in the 4th round, it's kind of like when the Packers drafted Christian Ringo and ESPN said, "Oh, they drafted a long snapper." And the Packers were like, "No, we drafted him to be a defensive tackle." And ESPN was like, "No, he's a long snapper." I think sort of a similar thing happened when Jared Allen was drafted back in 2004. No, was he traded for in 2004? God, I'm so bad at this. Anyway, when he was drafted, some people were like, "Oh, did you draft a long snapper?" And they were like, "Well, yes, but also no, he's going to be a defensive end." So, everyone was very aware of his ability to be a long snapper. So it's a little different. I don't know. I don't think that the Vikings should shed Blair Walsh for Cordell Patterson / Linval Joseph, although I would immediately tune into any game where something similar happened to any other team. So obviously this would be one of the most exciting things to happen to the Vikings. But
we've given them everything else. Why not give them this? An Aberration asks, can Arif replace Blair Walsh?
I did play soccer for a while, which, that's... Probably not. I would probably die.
Like one roughing the kicker, and that would be the end of you.
Kickers work out too, right? It's so that their knees don't break. Oh, that explains why I don't have knees anymore.
Yeah. Cody Whittington asks, should we have drafted a kicker rather than a German wide receiver experiment?
No, I love that pick, man. I loved it. And I think he's still on the practice squad. He could come back. be like on a Cordero Patterson trajectory, except it cost a 6th instead of a 1st. Who knows? Now, would a kicker have helped? Yeah, probably. I don't know. Were there any kickers drafted besides Aguayo? I think there's a couple of rookie kickers this year that are doing pretty well. So I don't know. But literally the only rookie kicker I can think of is the guy that's hitting 58% of his kicks.
Yeah, damn shame. Let's move to the offense. And a question from Alex Jury, who says, "Lie to me, Arif." Well, this is off to a good start. "Lie to me, Arif. You're Mr. Optimistic Outlook on the O-line, so paint me a picture of how this gets better. Tell me Bradford won't die on the field this season, and Clemmings won't go to jail for accessory to murder. Tell me our defense won't start giving up because our offense can't stay on the field or score any points. Tell me somehow our brain trust of coaching experience will help mask some of the many deficiencies our offense has. Tell me it won't be this bad again, and don't you dare say, well, it can't get worse." I just want to point out we received this email before kickoff of the Detroit game.
So, I am glad that the Detroit game happened to assuage many of these fears, although, of course, they lost. Yeah, I mean, Sam Bradford was under pressure, I think, the least amount out of the 9 weeks, and I think a lot of that has to do with the offensive design. A lot of it also has to do with how well Jake Long played, how well Jeremiah Searles played, how well Joe Berger played, and I think if Alex Boone is healthy, that there's a real possibility. They even mentioned it sort of last week in practices, though they couldn't do it because Boone was out. They even mentioned it in practices that Searles might be able to supplant TJ Clemmings at right tackle. If that is the case, then you've got 4 of 5 players who I think are performing pretty well, plus Brandon Fusco, who had a 2.5 game stretch of some pretty good play, and then of course this last game he didn't do very well. In the second half of the game before that he didn't do very well. So who knows which Brandon Fusco will get? But I think that if you move from having 3 or 4 bad offensive linemen to 1 bad offensive lineman who is sometimes good, I think you're in a much better position. And I think you're in an even better position with an offensive scheme that is much, much friendlier to finding ways to avoid pressure and getting receivers open earlier in ways that, allow Sam Bradford to get rid of the ball safely. So, yeah, no, I don't think it's even a lie. I think, and you saw that in the Detroit game, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for the offensive line to get better, prevent hits on Bradford, and allow the offense to sort of move forward. Second thing, the defense giving up. Mike Zimmer said there was a lot of fight from the defense in this game, which might be true, but it didn't translate into tackles. I don't know. I feel like if you kind of break this game down person by person or talent by talent, there's either, players where you're worried about and then they confirmed that they're on an upward trajectory, people like Jake Long, or players where they played poorly in that game, but you're not really concerned about them long term, people like Xavier Rhodes, Harrison Smith. There's only one player where I'm kind of stuck in the middle between the two, and I think that's Anthony Barr, who has been playing pretty poorly all season. But, we know he's a very good player and that he's played very, very well in the recent past. And so we're just kind of waiting for him to turn it on. Eric Hendricks is going to come back, too, which is going to be great because he's been excellent in coverage this year, which is kind of a stark contrast to last year where he was surprisingly poor in coverage, but also surprisingly decent as a run defender. I don't know. It's kind of a weird situation for him. But, yeah, no, I mean, Trey Waynes played well. I still think Waynes is riding the line in terms of what he is or is not, pass interference or holding and stuff like that, and you got kind of lucky in this game. But Waynes has been playing well. Newman is playing out of his mind. Evidently, Newman can play in the slot. Xavier Rhodes is somebody that we're expecting to bounce back, and I think the defensive line is generally pretty good. So individually, I think that you take a look at the offensive and defensive units, you could be pretty happy. I think that this kicker thing is a problem, obviously, but correspondingly, this punter thing is great. Jeff Locke is playing phenomenally. Who would have expected that? He's doing a really, really good job. So, I'm not saying the points that we lose are being made up for by Jeff Locke, but I think a lot of people, miss the difference on the scoreboard in terms of the field position game that punters can help you play. And maybe, Jeff Locke is adding more than a point in games than Walsh is losing on extra points. Now, field goals, that's a different matter. But, Locke's doing pretty well. So I think there's a lot of room for optimism, and I'm like a super cynical whatever. But yeah, I think that there's a lot to take from this game that's generally pretty positive, and not that many things from the game that make me think of depressing things from like a long-term perspective.
Matt Frazier asks, do you think our offense looking better is an overstatement considering how bad the Lions defense is? We can talk about how we actually had a bit of an offense. Like Diggs was getting all the receptions. Like it was looking fairly well. Bradford was not getting eaten alive.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. But I think that the difference is not so much in terms of like how the offense produced, and they definitely would have produced like 3 more points, but probably would have produced 7 more points had it not been for like 2 consecutive penalties. So it was like a 4-yard run from McKinnon, a false start, then a holding, and then a negative 4-yard run from Hillman, I think, and then a sack, like a 9-yard sack that turned a red zone opportunity into a punt. If it wasn't for those penalties, right, which, who knows? I think that the Vikings probably would have ended up, with a score of some sort there, and then that the game, is over. So hey, maybe it's like TJ Clemmings' fault. Yeah, I guess I would say that the offense is looking better, I think, schematically, not just from a production standpoint, because we saw a lot more screens on first downs. It's something that I mentioned in the advanced stats review that I did last week about, ways that Pat Shurmur can alleviate pressure and do things that he's historically been pretty good at. And that I think is a really important element of the game. In fact, the Vikings threw, I think, 8 screens in this game. And in the previous 7 weeks, 6 games, they threw 21 screens. So in this game, they threw more screens than the last couple of games combined, and they happened on first down instead of third down, because nor throwing screens on third and long is like the exact opposite time. I'm like interested in that as like a strategy. But here, Shurmur is replacing runs with passes. And in this case, it's working out pretty well. So that happened. I think that the schematically the way that the receivers got open on slants were really good because of the clear out routes. The 3 receivers to one side to challenge the coverage in zone coverage and move defenders off their spot and stuff like that. I thought that was really good. I think that some of the unique formations, like the 3-by-1 set, where you had tight end in line with an empty field next to him, and then 3 receivers on the other side of the line. I think that really challenges the way defense is set up, and it really exposes the kind of coverage they want to run, which is not something I think Norv did very well, even though he did a lot of motion to do the same thing instead. I thought some of the innovative play calls, Asiata Wildcat, didn't see that coming. Linval in at fullback. Those 2 plays were like an Ellison jet sweep and a play action to the tight end. I think that there's a lot of things from the offense that you don't have to take a look at it from a production standpoint to be really optimistic about, because I think the Vikings did a good job doing the things that we know they needed to do, or at least surmised that they should have done, to alleviate some of the problems that they had, and even emphasize some of the strengths that they have, because the Vikings have a bunch of very good after catch receivers. I mean, Cordero Patterson, that's kind of like his thing; it's his shtick, and Diggs is very good at it. He was coming out of Maryland. A lot of people were comparing him to like Percy Harvin, A, because like Percy's kind of from the region, but B, because people are kind of lazy in their comparisons. But he was a very good after-catch receiver as well there, and he's been doing a pretty good job with the Vikings as an after-catch receiver. Beyond that, Thielen's got some after-catch ability. Charles Johnson kind of has after-catch ability, which is like really weird considering the fact that he does better with contact when the ball is in his hands than when he's looking for the ball. But whatever, I think the Vikings have a bunch of after-contact ability, and that pairs really well with the fact that they need to get rid of the ball quickly, because of the offensive line. So I think that schematically there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the offense. I understand that you take a look at it from a production standpoint, and you're like, well, I don't know how happy you can be, especially against a bad defense, but I think that if you look at it from a different process, I think that there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic.
Let's look at a question from James Roberts, and it's a 2-part question here. He says, the Vikings have been under siege with pressure over the last 2, now 3 weeks, and have shown an inability to adjust play calling to counter. Number 1, could intermittently increasing the tempo of the offense help in dealing with pressure and in rushing effectiveness? And 2, how effective would rushing and passing out of the shotgun more often be? I mentioned the first one because it seemed like we upped the tempo quite a bit.
So the tempo was variable in this game, so it's actually closer to what you're saying in in the question because it was intermittent. So, for example, the first drive, there was about 38 seconds between plays that were either completed passes or rushes. I don't count incomplete passes when I count pace because obviously the clock stops. But it was like 37 seconds between plays, which is relatively slowish but fairly normal. But at the end of the first quarter, there were like 26 seconds between plays. They were very up tempos. Like there's a bunch of no huddle in there. Not all of it was no huddle, but a lot of it was. And the longest that was between plays at the end of first quarter was 37 seconds, as opposed to that being the average. And so. Yeah, I think that that's something that the Vikings did, and I think that that's something that you can do to help relieve pressure. And I don't know that relieving pressure is one of the primary goals or primary effects of that sort of thing. I think it's sort of kind of a tertiary effect as, defenses get kind of worn out, or they don't have time to set up, or they don't really have time to think about, the kind of thing that they're going to do on that play. I think that that's kind of like a third-order effect. I think that, the better effects are that you simplify the defense ahead of you and you get a better defensive look and sort of in the long run, you get a better understanding of the way the defense likes to respond to a lot of the things that you do. Plus, eventually you do wear out defensive linemen, so later in the game you can do stuff. It also allows you to call a variety of plays from the same formation, which makes you yourself actually pretty unpredictable, so long as you've got a well-developed no-huddle package. If your no-huddle package only has 6 plays in it, eventually they're going to kind of figure it out. But if you've got a well-developed one, you can be more unpredictable than the defense is going to be. And that in itself also relieves pressure because, sometimes defenders tee off based off of tendencies. Like, so, on third and long, all defensive ends know that they're just going to pin their ears back, rush the passer, not have to worry about containing run lanes or worry about, gap discipline or anything like that. And that's fine. But there are some instances on 2nd and 6 based off of, what they're seeing, the kind of the formation that you're looking at and film study that you're going to pass it. Like, 87% of the time that you're doing this, you pass the ball, and they feel like, well, that's an acceptable gamble to me. I'm going to rush the passer. In no huddle, that's really difficult because your formation can't give you away, or your personnel can't give you away, and very often your formation won't either. So, those are things that really help alleviate pressure in some third-order ways and also just help the offense, I think, in general. And it's that intermittent change that's really important because, we saw what happened in Philadelphia. If you're always up-tempo, and sometimes you see this at Oregon, but it matters less because substitutions are easier in college, and the drop-off in talent and substitutions are not as significant, plus practices and all that. We saw what happened to the Eagles is that your defense will get on the field faster, and that's going to cause some problems for you. And you tend to get actually somewhat more predictable, and people get used to playing the no huddle, and it kind of just goes away. But if you play intermittently like the Vikings did, it's going to help you out in a couple of ways. Then the second question: how effective will rushing and passing out of shotgun be, or more often be? The Vikings are in shotgun a lot, so it's not something I would say there's not an increase in effectiveness because of how often the Vikings are in shotgun.
Yeah. Next question. Sydney McSweeney asks, not to panic, can Patterson and Treadwell flourish in the post-Norv era?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if it's a coincidence that Treadwell got onto the field and got his first catch, in the first game that Norv was gone, but it certainly doesn't feel like it. It definitely feels like Pat Shurmur, either because he evaluated Treadwell differently or because he wanted to make, some sort of stamp on his first game, that he allowed Treadwell to do stuff. But
the answer that Zimmer made Zimmer had in the press conference was something along the lines of, it's about time he started making catches, which you could take in one of two different ways, I suppose, that this is something that they wanted to do but it haven't been, or that it's about time he showed enough progress that we put him out on the field. So, I mean, it's hard to determine exactly why he just started showing up on the field, but it was good to see, and our listeners will appreciate the fact that, yay, Treadwell was both on the field and making catches this time.
I think it wasn't a dig at Turner. I think Chris Thomason at the Pioneer Press was like, it's a dig at Norv Turner. And I think that it really wasn't. And the follow-up quote was really kind of more illuminated the fact that Treadwell was responsible for the amount of snaps that he was seeing on the field, although Zimmer did kind of mention that, maybe you wanted to see more of him on the field. But, definitely there was... there was an element of, no, Treadwell needs to do more to earn more time because it is good when he earns time because look what happens when he does. And so I think it's less about hey, Turner wasn't putting Treadwell on the field, look what happens, which that's not really much of an I told you so, like one catch for like 11 yards. It's more, I think, we believe in this kid, but he has to do stuff, and when he does stuff, it's great. That sort of thing. So yeah, I think we're going to see more of Treadwell. I think that some of the stuff that he's been doing, in terms of blocking, like he had a couple of excellent blocks in the game, and also he had an excellent release on his catch, which the broadcast sort of magnified and took a look at. It was really good. That I think justifies sort of more time on the field, and I think that he can flourish in the Shurmur system. Patterson, I think, is really built for what Shurmur does. So I think both of them can do pretty well. The only concern I have is Charles Johnson is seeing the field a lot, and I don't know that he deserves it.
Do you think they made Treadwell go out on Saturday morning to go pick up the donuts? Like, do you think that was the reason why they brought him in? He was the one who ended up bringing the donuts for Donut Club?
Yeah, this is as good a reason as any, right?
At this point, again, all bets are off. The Vikings have reached the Tyson zone, as Bill Simmons would refer to it, that any story that comes out, you might as well just believe, because there's no story too strange for this Vikings team to go through this year. Next question is from Bradley Peterson, who asks, knowing what you know now, would you consider the Bradford trade a failure?
No.
We're going to have to. No, because then we would have to bring Justice back on, which A, is just a horrible experience technologically, but B, admitting fault is not something we're going to do to him. No.
Yeah. No, I think so. I'm not above like pithy comments on Twitter that are really sarcastic and negative about the Vikings. I think everyone kind of understands that, right? But that doesn't mean that the Vikings were wrong. It's really difficult to evaluate because like when the Vikings made the trade, they had their starting running back, and actually it might be a better thing that he's gone. Who knows? But they had their starting left tackle, and maybe it's a better thing that he's gone. Who knows? They had their starting right tackle, and it's probably a better thing that he's there until Searles plays. They had like a bunch of things that they don't have now. And while it is weird to be like, honestly, many of these things are upgrades. At the time, the Vikings are still kind of scrambling, right? They're still trying to figure out what they can do with the pieces that they have. Does Sean Hill, win those first 5 games? Probably not 5. I could see, given kind of the nature of the offensive performance the Vikings put together and the contributions the Vikings had to those wins, I could see certainly 3, maybe 4, in which case you're just like, I don't know if he's worth 1 win. Does Sean Hill win any of those 3 games or any of the 2 games that the Vikings lost? I don't think so. So if you're saying, hey, that's the difference between a 5-2 and a 4-3 team, it seems pretty bad. But I think in terms of the ability to create wins in close games, I think that Bradford's a better bet, and I think the Vikings are going to end up in a lot of close games this year because they're not the top team in the NFL. They're acting like an above average team in the NFL, and I think that that's probably a good thing in terms of whether or not it's worth a big investment. It's difficult for me to say at this point. I don't think like the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks or any indication that suddenly the Bradford trade was a bad idea. I think the evidence still suggests that it was a good idea. That said, like, we're certainly open to the possibility that it won't be, right? Until by the end of the season, maybe Bradford gets injured, maybe Bradford continues to play at a level that's closer to, an average quarterback, which again, he's throwing for like a passer rating of 100, but I think that we can kind of agree that his performances are actually much closer to average than they were, when he was playing against, Green Bay, for example, was fantastic. And he had another like phenomenal game as well with 123 passer rating. And his performances are much closer to average than they are to that. So, a first round pick to move from like 34th, 35th best quarterback to like 14th, 15th, 13th best quarterback. Maybe that's worth it. That's kind of a conversation we had at the beginning of the year, and I'm not going to like backtrack on that conversation because I think that that's kind of the same argument. But I think that right now, I don't think we're at a point where we can change our minds again and say, hey, that's not worth it. I think that right now the preponderance of evidence is that it was worth it. But yeah, I mean, we can keep our minds open to the possibility, kind of into the near future that it's not. He's got like one interception, so
Yeah. Well, while we're on the topic of Bradford, let's go to Matt in Wisconsin's question, which is, why do so many Bradford passes get deflected? Isn't he tall or something? Now, I looked this up, and Bradford is 6'4", so he's just a hair shorter than I am. So why do...
Yeah, so really, he's just short.
So he's just short. I mean, I would look down to him. Down on him. I expect NFL players to just be taller than me. I'm just saying. So what's the deal? Why do his passes get deflected so often?
I want to look up his deflected passes rate because it feels like it's not that often. But then again, I'm used to watching like Matt Castle, whose passes got deflected like all the freaking time. By the way, also pretty tall. I think Matt Castle's 6'4", maybe he's 6'5". By the way, like Russell Wilson and Drew Brees don't get their passes deflected that often. Although Drew Brees did lead the league in deflected passes when he first arrived in New Orleans, which I think we mentioned on last week's show.
Yeah. There it is. Matt Castle, 6'4". I'll be damned.
Yeah. It's about it's about release point and trajectory and passing lanes, and that's really what it's about. It's less about height.
So you're saying that the quarterback for the Texans, for example, it doesn't matter the fact that he towers above every single person on that offensive line?
Yeah, Brock Osweiler has a lot of deflected passes.
Let's move on to our next question, which is from Adam Patrick, who asks, more rushing touchdowns for the Vikings this year, Linval Joseph or Cordarrelle Patterson?
Whoa. I hadn't thought about this. Let's go wild. Let's go with Linval, man. That's way more fun, and I love Patterson rushing touchdowns.
Who doesn't like the fat guy getting the ball? Like it's science. Fat guy getting the ball is ratings. It's entertaining. Let's just give the ball to Linval Joseph.
Right.
Stephen Adams asks, some talking heads think we need Adrian Peterson. I don't. But in theory, what are some ways that he could help?
Well, I kind of agree that I don't think that Adrian Peterson will help, and my belief is largely it's based off of the two things. It's you either have to believe that Adrian Peterson's poor production at the beginning of the year was either his fault, in which case he's obviously not going to help, or not his fault, in which case, it's like the run blocking is still bad. So, like, he can't change something that's not his fault. So there's nothing, right? I don't think that he then therefore changes anything. And it wasn't just, and his poor production wasn't just limited to the last 2 games, limited to like his last 8 or 9 games. So I don't think that he changes much. He's a very poor pass protector. He's a worse receiver. And I don't think that he changes the box. If I were forced to make an argument as to how he could help, it would be the idea that he's a veteran. I don't actually think that he's got very much like locker room leadership either. I don't want to stretch that truth too much. God damn. He fumbles more than anyone else on the roster, even more than Hillman. Jesus.
Didn't one of the talking heads on NBC say that the Vikings are really missing his pass blocking?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. If he's going to help, you have to believe the argument that it alters the number of players in the box, and I don't think it does. There is an argument that it changes the way defenses cheat, and that's true, but I don't think it has that materially large of an effect over the course of a game. It will have an effect on individual plays, and I think that you're a little bit more likely to be able to impact play action and stuff like that when you've got a player like Adrian Peterson. But I really don't think he has much of an impact. But that's the argument, is that he impacts play action and he impacts how defenses cheat, and you can design some better plays as a result of that.
Yeah. Brian asks, while I've been a Jet McKinnon advocate for the last few years, it's starting to seem like he truly is just a change of pace / gadget back. At this point, I think a slightly strong breeze would take him down for a 2-yard loss. Am I wrong?
Yes. I'm kind of surprised at the amount of insistence that McKinnon is doing poorly as a result of his own play this year. So, for example, in this last game, and a lot of people are talking about Ronnie Hillman, which is really weird to me because he only had 7 carries in the game. And I just don't think that you can build up a case for anybody off of 7 carries. And the reason that that's important is because Ronnie Hillman's average with the Vikings is 3.3 yards a carry. McKinnon's average is 3.1 this season. So they're not that different in terms of yards per carry. But, for some reason, Hillman is somebody that, people are more interested in. I know that this question is not about Hillman. I know it's about McKinnon. But I wanted to point out in this game, McKinnon's yards before contact were negative 0.5, which is astounding. The average in the NFL is 1.5 yards past the line of scrimmage, yards before contact. And with the Vikings, who've been particularly bad at it, the average has been 0.9 this year, something like that. I have to look it up for the season, but it's been really bad relative to the rest of the NFL. It's the lowest in the NFL, and it was much, much worse than it usually is for the worst in the NFL in that statistic. It just wasn't his fault in this game, and I'm not really going to knock him for falling after contact when the contact is a defensive tackle. His yards after contact with the Vikings right now is the exact same as Ronnie Hillman's. It's the exact same. So the idea that Ronnie Hillman is doing a better job after contact, or that Matt Asiata is doing a better job after contact, which is a much more reasonable belief, but still not borne out by the numbers. In fact, out of the 3 of them, Asiata is the worst at yards after contact, is not supported by any of the evidence. McKinnon, if you take a look at Hillman, Asiata, McKinnon, and Peterson, McKinnon leads those running backs in yards after contact. He also has the worst yards before contact, and I don't think that's because of him necessarily. There are instances where yards before contact is the result or the fault of the running back because of his decision-making, his patience, his agility, those sorts of things, and that's an important distinction that needs to be made. But I think in the case of Jerick McKinnon, almost all of the instances of poor yards before contact are just not his fault, and I am really, really suspicious of arguments about, he just got worse blocking, that's why his numbers are worse, from the same team for 2 running backs evaluating each other. I'm really suspicious of those arguments, and I think that they're generally poorly thought out, and I think that it's very difficult to prove. But based off of what I've looked at in terms of what happens with McKinnon's run blocking and his runs, and Hillman's and Asiata's, I think that is legitimately the case, and I'm really glad that the numbers support that, because I was beginning to think it, and I was really uncomfortable with that conclusion. But when I took a look at the yards before contact numbers, I think it kind of helped validate or help boost that case, right? Which is, again, not to say that that's proof. It could be vision or decision-making problems, but I do think that his decision-making and his vision and his patience are pretty good. Sometimes he's a little bit too patient, but I think for the most part, he's actually doing a good job, and I think that he's generating good yards after contact. A lot of people are really forgetting a lot of these runs where he gets met 2 yards after the line of scrimmage and he grinds out a 4-yard gain. For example, McKinnon had a 3-yard run in this last game. I think it was a second or third run, where he was met behind the line of scrimmage, and it was 2nd and 4. And so the 3-yard run is a successful play for the Vikings because it put them in 3rd and 1. It was more than 60% of the yardage needed to convert, which is kind of the standard what you want on 2nd down. So it was a successful run, and he was met 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage by contact, and he powered through it. Now he's probably the most powerful back on the roster. So I think that there's a perception of McKinnon that's kind of fed by his size and the conversation that's surrounding him, as well as the actual box score statistics that are being put together by McKinnon when he's running. And I understand all of that, but I think it is just not based in the evidence that we have.
Before we go on to the defense, let me just ask you a question. What do you think about the play changes that we ended up doing for offense? The quick dumps, the usage of Stephon Diggs as just a here's 5-7 yards, just catch. and the high percentage passes that we were decided to go with. Do you like this approach? Do you feel like this is the approach that the team should be using going forward?
Yeah, I think so. I would like a little bit more versatility in Diggs' approach. In fact, it seems like there's a very clear delineation of roles among the receivers. Adam Thielen and Charles Johnson were both like very prototypical split-end X receivers who challenge deep and sort of intermediate deep. And so that's their job right now. And Diggs' job is to move the chains and get short yardage and high percentage passes. And then for some reason, Patterson's job is actually a little bit more versatile. He gets screen passes and he also threatens intermediate. And those are like the jobs right now. And, after one game, maybe that's not a fair conclusion. In fact, it's probably not. But after like 14 targets for Diggs, you feel like that's kind of the role they want to give him. And I think that that's not really fair to Diggs. And I think it's also not a great, offensive plan for him because he's a very, very versatile receiver. He wins deep, he wins intermediate, he wins short, he wins, outside, and he wins on the inside. He can catch through contact and all that sort of stuff. The only thing he's not good at is like 50-50 balls in the air. So that kind of contested catch he's not that great at. Other kinds of contested catches, like catching through slants and stuff like that, he's pretty good at. So I think that I would like a more versatile role for Diggs, and maybe we'll see that going forward. But those, I think, are minor criticisms to the fact that we should be happy that I think the offense has changed in the direction that you described, because I think that that's a really good thing for the way the offense needs to be designed to accommodate kind of the whole style of the team, which is like a very ball control possession style team. The nature of the defense means that gambling is worse than it is better. Like if you're with those old Packers teams, the 95, 96, whatever, or even the 2010 Packers or 2011 Packers, or if you're with, last year's Jacksonville team, a higher risk style of offense makes a lot more sense because your defense is not going to keep you in games where grinding it out really makes a lot of sense. You kind of just have to, be a high risk player. But, the kind of defense that the Vikings have, you want to be a low risk player that puts yourself in positions to score consistently, but not like explosively. And that's fine with me, so long as the defense kind of holds up their end of the bargain. And for the most part, it has. Yeah, so I'm fine with that, and I think that it's a good way to protect Bradford, and I think it's a good way, to generate positive movement on offense. At the same time, it still threatens deep. Bradford didn't connect on any of his deep throws this last week, but he did make them. Like he did throw deep several times, so it's not as if it's like a Christian Ponder offense. It is still sort of moving the ball downfield at times. But yeah, no, I largely appreciate it. I would like a little bit more versatility to Diggs' role.
Let's go into the defense. And we got a couple of questions on the defense, but the first one is from Brian, who asks, where has the aggression on defense gone? Did Zimmer outthink himself over the bye week and change his play calling, assuming other teams would game plan to stop what they'd seen in the first 5 weeks?
I don't think Zimmer's defense has gone anywhere, and I think that maybe you could be right that like the aggression seems to be kind of deflated.
I think the lack of sacks is the thing you could point to immediately.
Yeah, and I get that. I don't know, like the defense, first, it ranks first in points allowed and points allowed per game. So that's good. It's still there. And that ranking hasn't changed too much. Beyond that, it's still getting pressure on the quarterback just a shade under 30% of the time. And its season average was around 35% of the time. Everyone kind of remembers the Carolina game, and it's now kind of hurting the defense from a reputation perspective because the Vikings got pressure on like 55% of their dropbacks in that game. If you take that Carolina game out, the Vikings are only getting pressure, I think, 33% of the time. And in the past 2 weeks, they got pressure 34% of the time. It's pretty good. Like, there are only 2 games where I think that the amount of pressure on the offense was just not good enough. It was week 2 against the Packers, which that didn't end up mattering because, I guess Sam Bradford is God. And, week 7 against the Eagles. There was another instance where pressure didn't arrive that often, and that was week 4 against the Giants. But I think that the reason for that was because they got rid of the ball so quickly because they knew that Eric Flowers was going to be consistently beat on every play, that they hurt themselves. Like, you can't get rid of the ball too quickly. Like, we've been talking about that this is an offensive change that the Vikings need to make, and it is. But the Giants kind of went too far, and they made their defense way too predictable and easy to beat. And that's kind of what happened in that game. So I don't actually mind that there wasn't that much pressure on that game. But there were only 2 games where there wasn't that much pressure. In this game, they got pressure on 30% of their dropbacks. Only one of them got turned into sacks. But I don't think the amount of sacks that you have is an indication of how much pressure you have. It's only an indication of how much sack conversion you have, which could be because of your ability to finish, or it could be because the quarterbacks you're up against. Quarterbacks have a really big influence on pressure to sack conversion rates, or it could be because of the style of offense you're up against. You take a look at not the Bears, but the Eagles and the Detroit Lions style of offense. The average depth of target of Matthew Stafford and Carson Wentz ranks 35 and 34th. Period. They're the 2 lowest passers in the league in terms of average depth of target. They get rid of the ball really quickly. They get rid of the ball to short targets, and they obviate the pass rush really, really well. That's what they do in this offense. That's what Jim Bob Cooter does with the Lions. That's what Peterson does with the Eagles. The only instance where in the past couple of weeks where they haven't gotten sacks was against the Bears with Jay Cutler. And Cutler played better against pressure in this game than he kind of has his whole career. The Vikings actually got pressure on 40% of their dropbacks in that game. 40%. So they actually did a good job getting pressure. They just didn't convert that pressure, and Cutler had the ability to sort of turn that into a little bit of magic. So I don't think the Vikings defense has gone anywhere in terms of their ability to create pressure. They're creating pressure at the rate that they normally do. They just happen to be getting fewer sacks. And honestly, was it 21 sacks over 7 games? That's not bad at all. Like, and that's being skewed by this Panthers game again. But even if you take that out and you just take a look at the 13 sacks that they've had, over 6 games, that's not terrible. You want a little bit more, but that's not bad. And the amount of pressure that they're getting is more than most in the league. And I think that too much is being made of it because we're not seeing it in terms of sacks, but we are seeing it. Carson Wentz's interception was on pressure. He also had another dropped interception that was on pressure. I think Jay Cutler threw 2 passes that should have been picked by Xavier Rhodes. I think one of them, if not both of them, were because of pressure. The interception that was thrown in this last game that was thrown to Chad Greenway was because of pressure from Daniil Hunter.
Let's be clear. The interception that was, if we want to actually extrapolate this further, we could look at it and say, the pressure caused the interception, which then caused the Vikings Twitter account to tweet at you.
Yeah.
So pressure is there.
Exactly.
That was amazing, by the way.
That was phenomenal. That was hilarious. Whoever the new social media person at the Vikings is, A+.
Kudos.
That's incredible trolling. Salute. But yeah, no, the pressure's there, and the pressure's causing interceptions. I'm not worried.
Next question is about Xavier Rhodes. Eli Vorderbruggen asks, is Xavier Rhodes finally a top 4 corner? If not, where does he fall?
Kind of a bad game to ask that question after.
Yeah, if we ignore the performance against the Lions, where do you think that he should be ranked?
I don't think he's a top 10 corner, and I'm gonna have to think about this really quickly because the landscape for cornerbacks in the NFL has changed pretty drastically over the past 2 years when it was pretty stable before that. But I would say that Aqib Talib is playing better. Terrence Newman's playing better, but he's not playing against number 1 receivers like Xavier Rhodes is. I'd say Morris Claiborne is playing at about his level, and I don't think that he's a top 10 corner. Darius Slay is probably better than him. Kevin Johnson with Houston is probably better than him. Chris Harris, Desmond Trufant. I think they're both playing better than him right now. Patrick Peterson. There's I think you could come up with a reasonable list of 10 cornerbacks that are playing a little bit better than him right now. But he is playing better than he has in a while. And he could be moving up in that direction. But, this game was not a game where I would, put... if he had played better against Alshon Jeffrey, and I know that I think he only allowed 2 or 3 receptions, maybe 4 receptions, but Alshon Jeffrey dropped like a deep one, and he also like lost Alshon Jeffrey in the end zone on another target that just didn't happen to convert. But that's not because of him; it was because of Cutler. I would be more comfortable putting him up there, but like right now, he's not playing like a top 4 or even top 10 corner, even if you exclude the Lions game. But he is playing like a pretty good corner, and I think that he's shown stretches of play this season and stretches of play 2 seasons ago where you can make the argument that he's kind of a borderline Pro Bowl cornerback. I wouldn't vote him into the Pro Bowl at that level of play, but I wouldn't like begrudge anyone who did.
Makes sense. Next question is by Nick Olson, who asks, should more teams call power runs against our A-gap mugging?
I think that that's a really good question because of what happened in this game. I think it was the Theo Riddick run was up the A gap, and I don't know. It was a trap instead of a power. It doesn't really matter because it was like an A gap run against the double A gap mugging, which is the essential nature of the question. No, because most of the time the Vikings do the double A gap stuff. It's with both Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks there. Emmanuel Lamar, I think, was at biggest fault there. But B, it happens on 3rd and long, usually. Sometimes it happens on 3rd and 5. We've been doing it a lot more on 2nd and 6, which can be a running down. But most of the time it's on 3rd and long, or it's in situations where you're not as worried about the run, and there's a reason you're not as worried about the run. I don't think that that's an essential weakness of the Vikings. The last big run they gave up wasn't up the A gap. It was either off tackle or off the guard. Either way, it was up to Jaron Kearse and Eric Kendricks to stop it, and they didn't. And Harrison Smith also didn't. But that was an outside run. And the last couple of big plays the Vikings have given up that were very, very that seemed like runs, but were actually just run after catches. They were outside passes to Derrick Henry, for example. So no, I don't think there's a particular vulnerability that the Vikings have up the A gap necessarily, unless it's Emmanuel Lamar in there, and it's like 2nd and 6 instead of 3rd and 10.
Yeah, nothing. It feels like we let more big plays go through, but if you were to look at it statistically, I don't think we'd be able to. It's not something that was just coming through the A gap.
Right. Yeah, and the Vikings are a good running defense. It's not showing up in the yards per carry statistics because they keep on giving up like one big run in each game. But for example, Jordan Howard ran like 3.9 yards a carry outside of that 69-yard run, which, okay, I don't want to say well, now it doesn't count, right? It clearly counts. It impacted the game. It led to a score, and so that run matters in terms of evaluating the run defense. But in terms of the ability of teams to generate runs that put them in good positions on 2nd and 3rd down, the Vikings prevent that from happening much more often than they don't. They've got a good run defense success rate, and they do a pretty good job of preventing play-to-play teams from doing a good job in the run. Now, if Eric Kendricks is back and Andrew Sendejo is back, and hey, maybe Sharif Floyd is back, I think the run defense turns from pretty good, you're underrating it, to wow, they suddenly got really good and everyone realizes it,
Let's move on to the final part of the mailbag, and it's a little less football oriented, but I think we're going to have some fun here. Let's go to the first question, which I suppose we can now reveal that our guest this week is going to be Master from who now covers the Redskins, who formerly covered the Vikings. So we're going to hope to get Master on this week. Question from Steven Adams is, how overhyped is Master's shoe game?
Oh, man. That was rude as hell.
I'm taking shots already at the guest.
Well, we'll obviously forward this question to Master when it happens. But for now, I'm not a shoe guy, but I'm a shoe guy, right?
I've seen the Viking shoes that you have in person.
Aren't they great?
They are a thing.
They are great.
I think I side with your. I think I side with your significant other on this. That they are in fact a thing. I think it's good that someone owns them.
They are great. No, I think Master Shoe Game is fantastic, but that's just me. I've seen it at training camp, so it's a little different.
A little different there, I suppose. Next question is from Riot, who asks, if Mike Zimmer and Scott Studwell got into a staring contest, who would win?
He's got Studwell.
Yeah, that's a long stare that Studwell has.
Yeah.
Who do you think would win in a fist fight?
Oh, man. That's tough.
Are we talking now, or are we talking peak Zimmer and peak Studwell?
Peak Zimmer, peak Studwell, I'll take Studwell. But right now... 2 years ago, I would have taken Studwell. Right now, I'll take Zimmer.
Yeah, I think Zimmer's got a little more rage over the last couple of games. I wouldn't cross Zimmer. I wouldn't be the person who got his Hardee's when his Hardee's order wrong or something.
Right.
Something terrible would happen there. Nathan S. asks the question, if you had to bring one Viking player to both a street fight and a bar quiz, which one would help you win both?
So I saw this question. So I don't see a lot of the questions beforehand because I want to be kind of up. But I saw this question beforehand, and it took me a long time to figure it out because there's a lot of tough dudes on the team. There's a lot of smart dudes on the team. There's a lot of overlap. But I can't just pick a smart dude, right? I need to pick a smart dude who knows random trivia, which I guess this is more like a guess on personality, right? Than it is, you didn't understand. And Teddy's a smart dude, for example, but I don't know if he is knows random crap about trivia kind of person. Maybe he is. I mean, he looks like a nerd, but I get the feeling that he's not. Same with Trey Wayne, super smart dude. I don't know if he's the kind of guy that knows random crap about trivia. It's like a personality thing more than it is an intelligence thing. And then tough dudes, you kind of want to know that they you can't just be tough. You got to handle yourself in a fight, right? Which is a little bit different. But I decided it's Anthony Barr. Yeah, sure, he's having an off season, but super tough. I bet he'll win fights. If he doesn't win fights, he'll intimidate the hell out of you. And he's definitely the kind of person that knows random stuff.
I was thinking that it could be Brian Robinson.
You see, Robinson was on my short list, I think. I ended up going with Barr because he's bigger.
I feel like you went with Barr because you wanted to feel like a Spielman for a moment at the draft and be like, he just has all these intangibles. If we could mold him, then he would be the perfect Barr trivia partner. Plus, if the other team got pissed off at us, we could fight. Actually, if I was playing against you,
though... Oh my god, I didn't even think about Anthony Barr trivia. Sorry, keep going.
If I was playing against you, though, if we had a team and you had Anthony Barr over there, I would choose Chad Greenway.
Man, I really...
More of a psychological ploy than anything else, but...
Man, he get ready for that fight. That's the problem. He's got motivation. Nobody I pick will have motivation.
No, nobody's going to have the the fight inside of him that the Greenway's going to have for that one. That's my choice anyway. Riot asks, the NFL seems to be taking great strides to protect players, yet this year seems injury-laden. What gives?
So we've been saying this for the past couple of years, but I do think research has indicated that there is an uptick in injuries. I think some of it is that there's an uptick in the willingness to report injuries, but that's only some of it. I don't think that accounts for all of it. I think that some of it has to do with the fact that decreasing the amount of contact in the preseason and decreasing the amount of contact in practices increases the amount of risk when you go full speed. Being able to go at half speed or three-quarter speed in practice and in the preseason really, I think, not just conditions your body, but conditions your brain, which is really, really important because the way that you react to impacts and trauma and stuff like that happens at an unconscious level can really impact your likelihood of getting injured. So I think that plays a role too. I don't know, some of it is just their knee injuries, and sometimes they're not even contact, so I don't know how much of it is conditioning, but I think that we can account for most of the difference in injury report rates by accounting for the fact that, or the likelihood that more injuries are being reported and the amount of pre-game contact practice has gone down. I think that accounts for most of it, probably not all of it. Maybe there's turf changes and stuff too.
But has there really been more injuries this year than last year? I feel like
I don't think more than last year. I think that the numbers I looked at, and I'm going to have to look for them. Maybe I can put them in the show notes. I don't know if they're easily findable again. But I think it's since the CBA is, so there's been more injuries since like 2010. Between 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, than there were 2008, 2009, 2010. So that's. I don't think there's more injuries this year than last year. I think you're right.
Yeah, I feel like it feels like it more this year because they all seem to be happening to us.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. Next question is from Dave, who asks, what do you think? Barring the Vikings getting back on track, do the Lions win the North?
Man.
I don't want to live in that reality. Can I just say that 2016 has been a really weird year, and clearly David Bowie was the thing that was keeping everything together? And once Bowie died, all bets were off, and like black is white, 3-1 playoff leads are no longer safe. Like, hell, the Cubs won the World Series. Like, I'm not okay with the idea that the Lions can win the North.
If the Vikings don't get back on track, which I think they were much closer to that in this Detroit game than they were, against the Eagles or against Chicago. Vikings don't get back on track. Yeah, it's the Lions. Matt Stafford is like the 4th best passer rating in the NFL. I haven't checked after the Vikings game, but and he's got like a bunch of playmakers. That defense is really suspect, but I think when Darius Slay comes back, Andrew Levy comes back, I think that they'll figure stuff out for themselves. So the Packers are like 4-4 now, right?
The Packers lost to the Colts, and I realize the Vikings lost to the Bears. Okay, whatever. But the Packers lost to the Colts.
So the difference, I think, between the Vikings lost to the Bears and the Packers lost to the Colts, and I think the Bears are probably a worse team, is that the Vikings lost to the Bears felt anomalous, whereas the Packers lost to the Colts felt ominous. It was just like, yeah, we've been having a lot of problems this season, and there it is. Whereas for the Vikings, it was like, man, where did this come from? What? Yeah. So
it was like it was more unexpected for the Vikings, whereas the Packers were like, same crap, different day.
Right, exactly. Right, they were just like, man, I thought the past 2 games, were an indication that we turned it around, but really we're like we have been this season, which is a much different statement.
to bring up the whole "we are who we thought we were" sort of thing.
Exactly.
Next question is from @Gazank, who asks, does not being able to grow any respectable bit of facial hair make No Shave November better or worse? Isn't every month no shave for you?
I would think that's what that would mean. It only matters if you make corny jokes about it. Like if you're like, I'm participating in No Shave November, and like you clearly don't have any facial hair, and like so the joke is like you can't grow facial hair, then it makes No Shave November worse because you make bad jokes. Otherwise, whatever. I was
gonna say is that's where you're going with that. I don't know. The whole like no facial hair thing can be useful occasionally, just not in November for the whole No Shave November thing. I know for a fact we have a listener who went to basic and he has just never been able to grow facial hair his whole life. And everyone at basic that particular year, I don't know if it's a thing every year, but this particular year, when they went to basic training, had to make sure there was not a speck of facial hair on them the entire time they were there. That was the rule. So he didn't have to shave for like 5-6 days at a time. And it just saved him. Useful. Exactly. Like there are occasional moments where not being able to grow facial hair works. You just have to luck into them. That's all. Next question is from Zen Cupid, who asks, burgers on a standard grill or a flat top grill?
Flat top, easily.
I'm going standard. I prefer a standard grill for a burger. Nice thick burger. I just don't trust flat tops for that sort of thing. I like the caramelization that occurs much, much better on a flat top, and you get a greater surface area. You have the ability. You have a lot more choices. I think on a flat top, you can like
smash the burger, and I know there used to be like a thing against that, like you should never smash your burger. But actually, there's a lot of blind taste tests and stuff like that that indicate, so long as you do it early enough in the cooking process, that actually it can increase the taste of the burger. So you can choose to do that. If you do it late in the cooking process, you're gonna like smash out all the juices, and it's gonna be bad. But you got a lot of choices, so you can choose to do that. You can vary the size, the thickness of your burger, and like what's great about that is that you can just put like a mixing bowl right over the top of your burger to cook it through if it's really thick. Or if it's thin, then you can choose whatever size you want. You can choose your cooking fat. It can just be the burger's fat. I think that at a grill you've got a much greater risk of drying out your burger by the time it's ready and done, and it's a lot more difficult to manage. You're not going to get like the grill flavor in the same way, but I think you're going to get a better tasting burger and a better like textured burger on a flat top.
On a standard grill, it's much more about timing. Like it's all about timing and being and like having your thermometer ready and just being able to handle it. I actually saw something recently where somebody was cooking a burger on a grill, but wrapped in aluminum foil, like trying to protect, like in some weird way. I just was looking at it, just wondering
why.
I think the idea was to lock in the juices for it, but still get the part of the flavor of the grill, but you're wrapped in aluminum foil. My immediate question when I looked at it was, how long has this person been a member of ISIS? Like, it didn't make any sense.
Right,
like, what are you trying to accomplish?
Like, I don't... The stuff doesn't happen. Like, all of the benefits to grilling are gone.
Yes.
The stuff doesn't happen.
Like,
Okay, we at least agree there. Yeah. And I'm not against grilled burgers. It's just like,
of course not. No.
The question was the preference, and so that's the preference.
It's like, but like, didn't make any sense. I was like, I don't understand what's going on here. This is not okay. The creator of this YouTube video should probably be arrested. Probably. We're going to go to our final question, which is, can you settle an argument for me? Is it duck, duck, goose, or is it duck, duck, gray duck? I feel like we've covered this on the show before, but it bears repeating. It's duck, duck, goose.
Yeah, it's duck, duck, goose. Okay, yeah, we're both from Grand Forks, so I think that's why.
And that's the thing. Yeah, I always thought it was weird. You occasionally heard people say duck, duck, gray duck, and like, what are you talking about?
Because universe you come from, child.
Exactly. Like we both went to school, like elementary school, whatever. Like a mile from the border with Minnesota. And maybe that's it. We just didn't accomplish it because I knew people who went to East Grand who were all about duck, duck, gray duck. I was like, what is wrong with your childhood? Like what?
Yeah, I remember there was like a thing about East Grand Forks. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's like weird because like people will say, oh, but you can be really creative because you can say like red duck or purple duck, and it's like we're not tricking anyone. First. You can if you just start a bunch of stuff with the word G, you've done that. You've accomplished the same goal. So that's that. Second, I think it's way more awkward. I think you want one syllable words.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I happen to know that my son is learning the duck duck goose method as God intended.
Fantastic. That's great news.
Yes. Just as the only person on the Norse Code staff with a child, I just want to point out that he is being raised the good way, the American way, the as we alienate the Minnesota loving the duck duck gray duck Minnesota base for the show.
Yeah, I'm glad that like we had an opportunity to alienate them again. It's been a bit. I feel better about alienating the audience. Good thing. It's episode 159. I feel like if you stuck around this long, you're probably going to listen to the next show, which is going to involve Master. We are going to preview the Washington game. We are going to have a little bit of fun with them, so we're hoping to tape that here in the next day or two. So look out for that. We're really looking forward to doing this one. So this has been a guest that we wanted to bring on during the playoffs last year when the Vikings were going to beat the Seahawks. Yeah, it was exciting.
Wasn't that a wonderful time? There was so much optimism. What happened to the optimism? So, we are looking forward to that. Arif, anything you would like to plug before we wrap up today?
Nope, I've got a game recap I'll put in the show notes. I'll try to look for that NFL injury rates thing to put in the show notes, and I'm going to have an advanced stats piece up at 1500 ESPN somewhat soon. I hope to turn it in by 9. I probably won't be able to. We'll see. And have it up by noon, but good chance that's not going to happen. Other than that, I'm going to get a piece on Pat Shurmur and the offense later in the week up at Cold Omaha.
Looking forward to that. So you can read Arif stuff there. Also, if you would like to comment to us, if you would like to send questions to us, you can do so in a couple different ways. You can tweet Arif at ArifHassanNFL. You can tweet myself at Big Mono. You can tweet the show at NorseCodeDN. If you would like to make fun of Dusty or ask Dusty about coffee, you can do so at Dusty O'Connell. And if you would like to email the show, you can do so at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. If you've liked the show, if you'd like to donate to the show, you can do so by going to paypal.me/norsecode, or you can go to patreon.com/norsecode. We really do appreciate it. Please keep sending the show out to people. Please keep spreading the word, and please keep giving us Tree Fitty in order to keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. So, for Arif, for Dusty, my name is James, and our formula is this. Spoons out. See you this week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.